Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at www.twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo action. Here today, we actually have a Diablo 4 build showcase. This is my solo push Necromancer on softcore. I've been playing softcore. I know I normally play hardcore in order to test various mechanics of the game and to make Maxwell guides and honestly just to kind of enjoy the game in a more chill format before season 1, where I'm very likely going to play hardcore and we'll do a group push. However, this character is a softcore level 86 Necromancer. These are her base screen stats. She's very strong. What I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to go over the skills, the Paragon, and the gear, and I'm going to do a demo of a tier 49 Sunken Ruins, so you can see her in action, where the monsters are just over level 100. And hopefully you guys enjoy this. This is a Brawler Necromancer, at least that's what I call it. It is a Blight Corpse Explosion Necromancer that uses Blight actively. I do realize there's a lot of other potential versions of this build, such as ones where you would use Reap to cast Blight, or at least some kind of shadow damage pool, or you could use Bone Prison to cast Blight, or you can just ignore Blight altogether and go with just Sever and other types of skills. Or you can just go like Bone Storm and Blood Mist with shadow damage. However, this is a type of darkness build that literally jumps into the middle of the monsters, has tons of crowd control, vulnerable, crit damage with the Shadow Blight ticks. Yes, it can crit. That is something I think a lot of people don't realize, but when you see it in action, I think you'll understand how it works. She is a very strong Necromancer that is capable of very hard content in the game. Obviously, once we get to level 100, we'll probably be capable of even harder content as we continue to level and develop this character. I have tried a lot of approaches on her, including summon approaches and a bunch of other things. I prefer not having summons in the late game, so once you get, past the leveling guide, which by the way is on maxwell.gg, the Blight Corpse Explosion Necromancer leveling build, that is on there. It will take you to level 50 with 10 extra skill points in Renown. Doesn't have anything to do with Paragon yet, though. So now this is an endgame guide and showcase, so you guys can know how to build this character. Backed by popular demand, as so many people are wondering what the heck is this build when they come into my stream, and they want to know how to build it because it's a lot of fun and it's super active, not passive at all. You are literally jumping into the heart of the monsters and going ham. Anyways, so we have Reap, Acolyte's Reap. This is for a corpse. You also get attack speed, sometimes from Enhanced Reap, and then of course for the damage reduction that is granted by Reap. So Reap is just really good. Damage reduction in close quarters, forms a corpse, attack speed. Pretty much everything you could possibly want on this character. Then, of course, we max out Blight. Blight does a lot of damage, actually. However, it's kind of a combination of insanely good crowd control and a ton of damage that you can keep putting on monsters over and over and over. And with one of the aspects that I'm going to show you guys, you can actually permanently crowd control monsters within range and keep them stuck and moving or shuffling around and not able to attack. It's pretty cool. Blight slows enemies by 25%, and then of course doing increased damage. That's one of the reasons why I like having Blight on hand directly, is you can do more damage within Blight, and it gives you that slow, which is going to help you stack crowd control damage and damage to crowd control or slowed enemies, which is really, really cool. Anyway, Blight is very strong. That is one of your key shadow damages. Reap isn't really a key component of your damage so much as it's something you kind of go in and do initially. Heated Flesh, you need this maxed. This will give you a lot of corpses. Every tick of shadow damage has a chance to create a corpse. And this is going to be really key for all kinds of reasons, including your Paragon boards. So make sure you max that out. Corpse Explosion itself is your main source of damage. Once you get some corpses on the ground, this is going to hurt a lot, hit a lot harder than Blight ever could. And so you're going to want to max it out. Of course, you're going to want to get Enhanced, and you're going to want to turn it into a Darkness skill that does shadow damage. That is essential to how this build works, and it's very, very strong. You're going to want Blood Mist as well. Blood Mist, and the one that leaves behind corpses is good. More corpses, the better on this character. You really want a lot of corpse generation. The main reason we get Blood Mist, though, if we're being totally honest, is that if you are ever crowd controlled or anything, you can break out of it. It is your only unstoppable immune break on the Necromancer that is possible, and since we're going to be jumping into the middle of monsters, we're going to be wanting to use this if possible, if needed. It can also get you just out of very dangerous situations where you're taking too much damage, and then you become untargetable and the monsters cannot kill you. It's honestly incredible if you're ever planning to get close to the monsters for any reason. Heck, even if you're not, it's still really useful as well. Grim Harvest. Honestly, as an essence generator, it's very good for maintaining your ability to cast Blight and keep the enemies crowd controlled, so it's a very good essence generator. In the late game, you can kind of forego this to some extent, but it's just very useful for keeping your damage up. I still think despite the nerf to this, it used to be 9 essence, still very solid. And then of course, you're going to want Fueled by Death. So after consuming a corpse, you gain increased damage. Pretty straightforward, and since you're going to be consuming a lot of corpses with multiple abilities, actually, that makes a lot of sense. Now, so this is where there's actually some options on this build to some extent. So you have to get Corpse Explosion. This build builds around Blight, so, unless you want to go into the other approaches, like I mentioned before, you would use Blight and you'd use Corpse Explosion and Blood Mist, especially if you're jumping into the middle. However, this is an approach I'm currently not going that you can go. Now, Blight already has the slow unlock, so to some extent this is redundant. I think this works a lot better with approaches that don't use Blight, because it has slow, but it also grants damage reduction, and more importantly, if you get Abhorrent Decrepify, you can reduce your cooldowns by 1 second. You can use this instead of Blight, probably instead of Blight, or even instead of Blood Mist if you don't plan on going close to the monsters. And then you can slow them, and then you can reduce the cooldown of Bone Storm, and Bone Storm is very strong on this build, so we'll talk about that. But in general, you're going to want maxed out Death's Embrace. I go close to the monsters, so even though monsters can hit me from afar, I'm not like attacking from afar, so Death's Reach doesn't make as much sense. But if I get a lot of DR and I get a lot of extra damage for doing Death's Embrace here, which is really good. Then of course you have Corpse Tendrils. I only put 1 point into this, but you can see it has 8 rings into it. That is because there are 7 rings for my skills. And basically, that's really good because you want the cooldown to be as low as possible on this. And it's mostly for the cooldown. Corpse Tendrils is incredible on the Necromancer. I don't know of any build I can possibly think of where you wouldn't want Corpse Tendrils. I mean, I know some Necromancers have been playing without it. Blood Mist I think is like almost a need, but not exactly always a need. Decrep is always a solid option, but this is like necessary. Like, this is insane. So the vulnerable for 3 seconds is our source of vulnerable, which is 20% increased damage, which is pretty big. And there's a lot of other, damage to vulnerable enemy stats on gear that play off of that as well. Enemies that are in range of Corpse Tendrils are slowed before being pulled in as well, so you just get all this time where the monsters are CC'd, and it's pretty much only like a 4-second downtime where the monsters would not be CC'd or vulnerable as a result of Corpse Tendrils, and by then you're going to probably be able to kill them pretty easily anyway. So yeah, pretty insane. You definitely want to go plagued corpse tendrils. Of course, you know, if you're fighting a really long boss fight, you can always consider something that can give you maybe some health or something, but nah, trust me, that vulnerable is just crazy. At this point, though, you know, once you have your max skills, you're going to go max Reapers, max Gloom, and max Terror. You could do some more into Crippling Darkness, but the truth is this is kind of bugged anyway, so it's not really doing much. But the main key is that you have these maxed out for the extra shadow damage and for the movement speed. Necrotic Carapace is pretty big as well. This is going to give us Fortify, so every time a corpse is formed, every single time, you generate Fortify. And of course, once you have max Fortify, you get damage reduction, which is very nice. You always want as much DR as possible, truly. Alright, so this particular approach uses Bone Storm. Bone Storm isn't absolutely necessary. You can definitely do some other approaches, but it's pretty key. At any rate, so you have damage reduction is increased by 15% while it is active, and you have crit strike chance increased as well. I don't go for the versions like the decrep version or even the aspect that can lower the cooldown. I mostly just use this in a really tough situation. Let's say you know you're about to jump into a pile of like, I don't know, like 10 elites or so. Well, you're going to want this for sure to ensure that you can actually kill them without dying. It's got incredible shielding. With the aspects I use, it's actually really insane. In addition to having Supreme Bone Storm. We're not using any minions, so Stand Alone is an incredible passive that gives you 18% DR. And of course, increasing their sacrifice bonuses is really good as well, considering that once again, we are not using them, so you're getting a lot of extra damage from this, from the sacrifice of all of them. Very nice. And then of course, Shadowblight. Shadowblight is an absolute necessity. This is your key passive, and this is going to make your damage stack to absurd degrees, especially when you have aspects. So you can see on my bar here, we have Reap, Blight, Blood Mist, Corpse Explosion, Corpse Tendrils, and Bone Storm. Book of the Dead. Alright, so you're going to get the Sacrifice Reapers, so you do increased shadow damage. All of your main damage is shadow damage. You're also going to want to have increased damage to vulnerable enemies by sacrificing your mages. That makes sense since you have vulnerable up almost all the time with Corpse Tendrils. Now, you could also go some other things, but they're not nearly as effective on this build. So, you could also get your increased critical strike chance, especially if you're lacking it on your gear. That is another viable option if you feel like you need some more crit chance. Same with the Golem. You could get increased attack speed if you prefer it. Attack speed is very good for getting out more of those corpse explosions a little bit faster. And sacrifice the Bone Golem. But if you sacrifice the Iron Golem, you get increased crit strike damage, which allows you to do pretty absurd amounts of damage. So that's very good. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the skills and the Book of the Dead. Now, what we're going to show you guys is real closely here is the Paragon board. And then we're going to show you guys the gear, and then we're going to do some quick demo or demos. Okay, so basically this first board here is pretty key. So you have on the starting board, honestly, you kind of get everything. You're going to want maximum life by this point in the game. I prioritize damage though. So in the beginning of the game, in order to ramp up your damage and to make your build truly effective, I would personally prioritize damage on the Paragon board. And when you start to push higher Nightmare Dungeon tiers, or just really hard content in general, that's when you can go a bit more defensive. But you can also go a half-half approach. You don't have to do exactly what I did. In general though, you're going to want to hit up all the blue nodes and the damage nodes on the starting board. And then I put the control glyph socket here. Now, control is very good for this build because you're constantly slowing with Blight, Corpse Tendrils, or even stunning with Corpse Tendrils. And so you're constantly slowing down the monsters and just crowd controlling them in general. So this is very good. And of course, you want to meet the bonus if possible, and there's 40 intelligence here, even without rank 4 glyphs. So even without leveling up your glyph, there's exactly 40 intelligence you can put around it in order to make sure you're doing maximum damage to enemies that are crowd controlled. Alright, and so the next board is very important. So this is the Wither board. So Wither, I think, is definitely the priority next. Which you can see here, kind of makes sense, right? We have a lot of willpower too, and that's helping to kind of buff it. So just keep in mind that every 50 willpower will actually make this even stronger. But basically you're just getting bonus damage every time you have shadow damage over time, which is both Blight and Corpse Explosion. Very huge. So I went for that first. And then you may as well hit up the maximum life here, or the damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. That's a good way to get a DR. You're constantly doing shadow damage over time. And of course, you're constantly doing that, so you want to increase the damage you do to them as well. However, what you want to prioritize on this board is going for the legendary node, and then you can get these later along with all the blue nodes. Blue nodes are very good, by the way. They add up. Lots of extra damage, lots of extra stuff. You're actually going to want to go straight up for that lingering shadows, just extra shadow damage. And then you're going to want to go for the glyph socket. Glyph sockets are very strong in your Paragon boards. And then you're going to want to hit the darkness glyph. So darkness glyph is very good. There's enough willpower here as well to make full use of it and to get that extra bonus as well, doing even more damage once again. And then this isn't much of a priority, but since you have to hit willpower anyway, where I was trying to max out the willpower on the board, ended up getting that. It's actually not that important of a node, but I was going for all the willpower. You know, I'm pretty high level, right? And I have all my Paragon points from Renown done and everything as well, so I have all these extra points. I definitely recommend you guys always have a potion running and make sure to finish that Renown for sure. This is a crit strike damage potion, kind of nice. Malediction. So this one's really good too. So the shadow damage are the ones I really went for first. Shadow damage and shadow damage over time. Both very solid. And make sure you get that darkness glyph. Darkness glyph works really well in the withered board. It's pretty much a darkness board, so it makes sense. Then I attached at the top again. Not a lot of reasons to go for the sides, and we already have all this stuff going on around the sides and the top. But we probably could have done it either way. Doesn't really matter. However, the next board you're going to want to go for is the Flesh Eater board. Now, this makes sense, right? This means every time we consume 5 corpses, a corpse explosion or corpse tendrils, we get a huge damage bonus. So yeah, that's gonna make this really, really good. Of course, you're gonna. What I went for, I don't really care about potion healing too much. I don't feel like that's that important, so I ignored it. We went for damage to injured enemies. Went for Flesh Eater. Just to let you guys know, damage to injured enemies and critical strike damage is very, very good. It's good to help you finish off enemies as well. And then you get damage to elites, which is also really good. I went for this anyway because may as well. Getting some extra resistances isn't bad. Make us a little bit tankier. You're also going to want some dex all the way out here anyway to help out this. It's pretty tough to get enough dex over here, but interestingly enough though, this doesn't benefit from every dex point. You only need just a minimum of 25 and then it does its job. So once you hit 25 dex on this one, you're good. But as you can see, it's buffing all of the rare nodes around it. It's actually Gravekeeper, and the additional bonus is the reason you get this one. Not necessarily for the main and the side bonuses, but mostly for the additional bonus, which of course it's helping out our rare nodes, but it has to be level 15 in this board. So you have to get this one to level 15. If you want to prioritize leveling this one, because you don't do many nightmare dungeons, consider that, because it has to be 15 to have enough radius to hit 25 dex, and even to hit the rare nodes on top of that, and to be in range of the rare nodes to boost them. So it has to be level 15 for every reason. But you deal 2% increased damage up to 12% for every close corpse. That's big because this build just generates crap tons of corpses. So remember Hewed Flesh, and remember Reap, and remember all those other ways we get corpses. Just generating them with Bone Storm as well as we do damage. Once again with Hewed Flesh, there's just a lot of things. And if you use summons, you know, the Reapers that hew corpses, or the Golem that sheds corpses, that works as well. You could use summons. I don't really prefer them at this point in the game though, because they die unless you invest more into them. They die quite a bit. But as you can see, damage to elites pretty big. Getting more damage from just corpses. And then we attach this board. Now see, this is where I just started. But doing more damage to healthy enemies I think is better than the Shadow Resistance, at least initially, so we're going to go for that first. And then we're going to go for Scent of Death. So this is the Scent of Death board. It's going to give us 15% damage reduction with no corpses nearby. I get more damage. So most of the time we have corpses nearby, so this will just give us damage reduction mostly. So we're looking for a TR at this point. There really aren't any other offensive boards for this build that are very good or useful at all. So at this point we're mostly going for some defensive stuff, but notice that even on this defensive board there's a lot of offensive nodes, rare nodes. And that's definitely one of the main reasons we're going for this board. But to be honest, though, we could probably benefit to some degree from both sides of the board. So, yeah, I think this is going to be my last board, to be honest. Probably, I might hit up every single one of these rare nodes. Very good stats. Maximum life on this one. Even armor is pretty good, and it's right next to the glyph socket, so I'll probably need that anyway. Now you might be wondering what glyph would I put there if I had a choice. Probably Exploit. So where's Exploit here? Exploit. Dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage. So once again, we have vulnerable for a long time with that Corpse Tendrils, and the uptime on it is very high. So we're probably going to go for Exploit next. You could go for Exploit earlier than this if you want. I just think Darkness, Control, and this one that gives you damage for close corpses and that boosts the rare nodes is a little stronger. But I think Exploit is probably the next logical choice, and this will be our final board once again. Alright, so let's check out the gear. So you can see that one thing to keep in mind when you're doing Paragon is make sure to hit those breakpoints, by the way. You see how it says 477 out of 450? Make sure if you need your gear to help you hit those breakpoints, make sure you're getting that extra bonus out of the rare nodes because it's really strong. And of course, obviously, the more boards you go, the more stringent the requirements. So you see the requirements in earlier boards aren't quite as bad. But you can see, though, that we're hitting this by only 27 dexterity right now, and that's perfectly fine. And remember that willpower boosts this node, so every 50 willpower. So yeah, pretty important stuff. All right, and so then we have a helm here. So this helm is all about defensive power. We jump into the monsters, so we need as much as possible. Some people would argue you should even put this aspect, which is an aspect you can get from the Codex of Power, by the way. It's a weak version of it, but if you get the stronger version of it, you could get 75% additional armor, and every tick of shadow damage stacks it, so it's pretty insane. But the main function of this helm is to give us everything we could possibly want, mostly just really high life and high armor. The res is not super effective in Diablo 4, as I'm sure a lot of you guys have observed. Resistances aren't that important. However, resistances still do something. It's still like 5% damage reduction from fire damage and 5% damage reduction from light damage. I think that's how the math works out. Yeah, it's kind of weird, but yeah. And then, of course, rubies and everything for maximum life in your main armor gear. But alternatively, you could also use topazes if you hate being crowd controlled. However, I would never do any kind of nightmare dungeons with cold enchanted elites. the cold empowered elites, the frozen elites. When all the elites are frozen, you're gonna have a really bad time, no matter how much crowd control reduction or blood mist or anything else you have, including the unstoppable when injured one, the aspect. It just won't matter. Now in the armor, damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. As you can see, that's a really key point here, very key. And then, of course, you have a lot of maximum life. Or you could get higher than this, definitely could, but it's a very high one. Extra shadow damage, it's very high. And then total armor percent once again. Really trying to get those stats almost as high as possible, as you can see here. Definitely. Now, this one is giving us... You could use some other defensive aspects, because remember, you're going into defensive aspects are pretty important. Sock horror. I don't know about playing this on hardcore. Not in Nightmare Dungeons, at least. You're definitely going to want to take that slow. But Bone Storm gives us a barrier, and this barrier generates insanely fast. As long as you get like a perfect version of this aspect, which this one is, it's very strong. And so this is one of the things that makes Bone Storm so effective, outside of its DR and its crit strike chance it gives you just from the passive upgrades, which is pretty cool. This is mostly what you're going to want in your gloves are critical strike chance. If you're just doing a Blight build like me, Blight is very effective here. You can also get crit strike chance to injured enemies, which is another potential stat. The damage to injured enemies is also a good stat. And then, of course, this dex is actually helping us reach some of those breakpoints, but it's also giving us additional crit strike chance. What's interesting, though, is that this aspect could be a couple of different things. So you sacrificed all your minions. You could use the sacrificial aspect to get 25% bonus across the board on all your sacrifices. That's not a bad idea. But if you do want to make use of Bone Storm, I really like this one because it turns your Bone Storm into shadow damage, which stacks up Shadowblight. Remember, every stack of Shadowblight is going to get you closer to bigger and bigger damage ticks, so... putting this in a big pile of enemies is going to start, it's going to allow you to melt them very fast. Of course, we have a barrier here, so you have the barrier. I really like the barrier aspect on the pants. I think the barrier is just really good. Having 5,000 barrier every 30 seconds, potentially, when you attack an elite is really, really good for survivability. I'm a big fan of this barrier. Of course, you could have 3 to 4 rings of corpse explosion. You can have life. As you can see, the life could be quite a bit higher on this. But we're also getting a lot of damage reduction stats too. Now, keep in mind that any one stat in particular does have diminishing returns if you have too much of it. So I do recommend kind of diversifying your stats a bit. You know, you have like maybe these types of DR, so close enemies make sense as we jump into the middle, right? But maybe you have flat DR, make sure you have like armor. One thing that doesn't have diminishing returns is life, so life is pretty much always good, so keep that in mind as well. You could have the potion grant you a barrier type of pants as well, but movement speed is really good on a Necromancer considering you really lack mobility on a Necromancer. And of course, more Royal Rubies in here for now. I mean, I'm sure there'll be more upgrades in the future. Now this is pretty insane. So we do want the evade grants movement speed. Once again, that's almost certainly something you want on these. You go 2 max evade charges as well. That's pretty much the only other one I'd consider on this build. But I don't know. I think this one's just way better. And then +4 ranks of corpse tendrils. That's going to get the cooldown really low on it. If possible, that is a good thing to have. Also, other types of damage reduction, very good on boots. You definitely need movement speed, though. That is almost required to have on your boots because you have no movement speed on the Necromancer and you don't have a lot of mobility. It's very good. And stats, all stats helps you in every way imaginable. Keep in mind that even besides Paragon, this helps with critical strike chance, dodge chance, resource generation, resistances, skill damage, armor, all that stuff. And the imprint on this one is pretty darn good. So this is the thing that you can makes it to where if you spam Blight, you can keep the monsters constantly moving around and pull them into the vortex. So besides corpse tendrils, which pulls all the monsters into one spot, you have another way to keep the monsters stuck in one little area so they don't move around and they take maximum damage in your pool. The whole goal of this pool is to jump into the monsters and create a death pool, like a death whirlpool of darkness where the monsters just get destroyed. That's the idea. And blowing them up as fast as possible. Now this is a very good weapon. You can see it's a 815 plus 25. Two-handed sword, you're going to be doing maximum damage with this. The critical strike damage stat is going to make it do a ton of damage. You can see here that we're not slacking on critical strike chance. It's almost 40%. And that's base. Besides some of the aspects and besides what we can do with Bone Storm and besides what you can do with potions, it's pretty insane. Alright, so you have damage to crowd-controlled enemies, you have damage to affected by shadow damage over time enemies, you have damage to slowed enemies. Good. Make sure all your stats on your weapon help out your build in some way. And of course the 81 all stats is pretty insane. So that's really good as well. But you could also have another damage type on top of that as well. So it's always possible to maybe get something slightly better or to get better rolls. But we do a lot of crowd control, we do shadow damage over time, and we slow the enemies constantly with both Blight and Corpse Tendrils. It's a lot of damage. Of course, if you had Decrep, it would also slow the enemies just as much. Of course, critical strike damage to crowd-controlled enemies is great because we do crits and we crowd-control the enemies and makes them hit even harder. I like having this aspect on the weapon, but you can either have this aspect, the decay aspect that you have to find no matter what. This is a great roll, and if it stacks up to 5 times, you can see the damage can get almost 400% higher with the Shadowblight doing damage. It's pretty insane stuff, but the Shadowblight has 2 main aspects. That one and this one. This one you can actually get from the Codex of Power, obviously. Remember, the Codex of Power versions are much weaker than the ones you find out in the wild. So, this one's a perfect version of this one. And this one you could also put on the weapon, and this one you could put on the amulet, vice versa. You could even put this one on a ring if you want to put the armor one on the amulet, just because the armor one is so ridiculously strong. You can do that too. But this one is, you know, you get increased damage every time it deals damage to enemies 10 times. I think this one ramps up a little bit faster. So yeah. It's pretty cool. But, I don't know. You could put that one there, you could put this one there, you could do either one. I think this one could definitely make the damage to bosses pretty insane. It's kind of up to you, though. You could get 206, you could do 240% if you put it on the weapon versus 180%, and vice versa. Like I said, there's definitely a couple of options there. Now this amulet here, damage. Alternatively though, faster run walk can spawn on an amulet. That's something that I had on my old amulet and it was really good. So keep that in mind. But plus 3 ranks of corpse skills, insane. That's really good. That's one of the best stats you can get. And then ranks of terror passive. You might have seen this when I had my skill tree up. We have 6 ranks of terror. That's an insane amount of bonus damage you're getting from the darkness damage there. So it's really good stuff. Very good stuff indeed. Okay, so that's really good. And then this imprint, I would definitely have this on a ring or on the gloves. It's got to be on. It's offensive, so it's rings, gloves, amulet, weapon of some kind, right? You're gonna want to have this somewhere though. This is insane. It's almost 20% crit chance when they are pulled in from corpse tendrils for 6 seconds, which is longer than the vulnerability lasts. So it pretty much lasts as long as it possibly can before the next corpse tendrils comes off of cooldown, which is pretty insane. Basically means you get like crazy amount of crit chance, and you have even more bonus critical strike damage from this. I think this is like an incredible aspect. for this build, or just for most Necromancer builds in general. And then, of course, you have the restore 4 of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. As you can see, the base version of this has 1, which is not that great. If you can find a perfect one that has 4, though, this allows me to spam Blight constantly, which allows me to keep the monsters crowd controlled. It's pretty nuts. As long as I'm not just attacking a single target, I sustain very well with this. One thing to mention here is that, of course, the Sapphires are critical strike damage to crowd control enemies. If you want to focus more on damage over time, you could also use Amethyst on the weapon. On the jewelry, it's pretty much just a skull game. Skulls are armor, and armor is more effective than resistances overall. You could go some resistances if you have like no resistances anywhere pretty much, but for the most part, it's skulls. You just want skulls there for the time being. Okay. Wow, that was a lot to go over, right? Well, you would be right in thinking so. So, what we're going to do now is we are going to do a demo of this character. Now, there's a lot of elixirs you can drink, but make sure you always have one running. You can try to mitigate certain types of damage by using resistance elixirs, maximum life. There's a lot of crazy elixirs you get from doing Helltide. Helltide gives you all kinds of insane things. You could also just go for increased crit strike damage if you want to, as well, which is very good. Okay, so where did I activate it? Where is the dungeon? It's in Skosklin, right? Yeah, it's in Skosklin. Okay, so it's whoa, it's all the way up there. Okay. Good stuff. Alright, so we're gonna go smash this to tier 49, which is pretty high. I do lower ones easier, pretty much as every build does, but you know. And the monsters are such a much higher level than me, they get some pretty insane bonuses against me. So we'll see how this works out. If this... I've tested 45 on stream, so this is pretty high even for my testing. And we'll see how this goes. If this is a little too hard, we can demo 40s like I typically do, just so you can see how it is. It's partially a function of the fact that I'm only level 86, so if I was a higher level, we'd have a lot more life, you know, we'd have that 4th Paragon board more filled out. Every 4th of a level, getting quite a bit of power from that. You don't even have the legendary node yet. You know, like we're really close on that 4th Paragon board, but I thought I just had to do this video now because so many people are interested in this build. They watch my stream and they think, wow, that's a really fun way to play Necromancer. Board of Bone Spear. Bone Spear is boring. Just currently the dominant build. I would say for the most part, and then of course maybe Bone Spirit is annoying because you have to run around in circles and kite the monsters, and in general people just don't want anything to do with any of that nonsense or any of that noise, so they don't do it. Or, you know, they don't like the more passive playstyles in general. They maybe use skeletons, they don't like waiting for them, so this build is really good. Tier 49. So let's see. How high monsters are these monsters? Like 103. As you can see, we definitely don't have a damage problem. Look at those damage numbers. Whew. Oh my god. So what we want to do is want to jump into the monsters, cast Reap, Corpse Tendrils, and then Blight and Corpse Explosion. Pretty much after that, that is what you do. So Blight to hold them in, keep them in, start the initial stack. Wait, what is this dungeon? Volcanic. Ooh, I gotta watch that. Okay. It means there's like little volcanoes that come up under me. I was wondering why I was taking so much damage all of a sudden. Yeah, that would be why. Look at those giant damage numbers. Yeah, we get in the millions, get million crits. Once again, you know, there's a lot of room to go up with this build still, in terms of survivability and damage. It's pretty cool, right? Now, I would say... yeah, these ghosts do a lot of damage. I think Volcanic also got me there. Notice how I can always cast Blight to keep the monsters controlled, and then I can spam Corpse Explosion. You'll notice I haven't even used Blood Mist or Bloodstorm yet. Most of the time, you don't need to. Look at the passive damage. Right here, I'm just using Corpse Explosion. That's all I did. A lot of the time, you just want to spam Corpse Explosion. Get those corpse stacks up. Make sure to use that Reap for that extra DR and Explosion. If you want to, you could use Blood Mist to escape death explosions from the monsters. You can save your life with it. As you can see, though, I have enough tankage to, in general, kind of survive stuff. I haven't seen any elite monsters yet, though, so they haven't really been tested too much just yet. Jeez, yeah, level 49 monsters are nasty. Wow! I didn't think it could one-shot me from that much HP. Well, that's kind of cool. Level 103 monsters. Who would have known? Actually, no. I think that was Volcanic that got me. Did it say kill me? Oh no, the Banshee did finish me off. Interesting. Yeah, look at that. Look at Volcanic. Ugh. I really don't like this modifier, but on Nightmare dungeons, you're gonna encounter some nasty modifiers, and sometimes you just have to suck it up and just deal with them. Now look at this. You use Bone Storm. Get that other... get the Corpse Tendrils. You jump into a bunch of elites like that, so when you see a whole bunch of elite monsters, you pop Bone Storm, you jump in, the Shadowblight starts ticking, you get crazy barrier. And then, of course, you get the corpses, you get Corpse Tendrils on the ground, keep them in place with Blight, keep them all bunched up. Do it again. Ghosts do a lot of damage, by the way, so if you don't like taking a lot of damage from afar, I would avoid ghost dungeons for sure. And like, dying will happen as long as you don't die more than, you know, 4 times, right? This is why people in hardcore avoid nightmare dungeons, especially soloing them. That's a dangerous type of a monster there, too. Notice, though, that all these damage procs are giving us so many corpses. Oh, we got another Paragon plant. Notice that damage isn't really our problem, it's survivability, so when you start to push, like, level 50 Nightmare Dungeons on this character, probably didn't actually have to use that there, I was fine. I panicked from the Volcanic. Wow. Yeah, look how much damage that thing does. Yikes. I just critted for 100,000 then with Blight itself, and that's just the initial impact. Now you guys might be wondering, once again, what the heck is critting if it's damage over time? It's initial Blight impact, and it's Shadowblight. So we just jump into the monsters and go brawling, man. This is a Brawler Necromancer. This is how you play it. I'm sure as we continue to level up, maybe get that DR from that next legendary node, get some more life and whatnot. Tier 50 dungeons will become pretty easy. As you can see though, the monsters already have a permanent advantage in this dungeon as they are a higher level than you can even get to in the game. But notice though, I keep them controlled with the Blight. It's mostly ranged monsters that are a problem for this character because they don't really have much damage reduction for like distant enemies or anything like that. So if you have dungeons with really high damage distant monsters, you might want to consider skipping this.
Please, take it back from them. Let it end.
Alright, there we go. We only have 2 more to go. Let me know in the comments below if you guys think this is a fun way to play Necromancer. Of course, I'll try to get some stats there for you guys. Try to get some timestamps. Now notice that in something like this, all I have to do in an event, especially where it's like survive the onslaught or something, is just create this death pool in the middle. And the monsters literally cannot survive it. Be sure to use those potions, man. Especially when you're doing a tier 50 on a level 86. Woo! Well, almost tier 50, not quite. 1 more level wouldn't do much, though. That's volcanic. That almost killed me. Oh, dear. All right.
No, please.
I guess he died. Okay. Anyway, all you have to do is go in the middle and you're good. What I get for not paying attention much to that. Anyway. Here we go. It's not a big deal though. Oh, freak, man. Look at that barrier provided by the Bone Storm there. Pretty much invincible with that barrier up. Just use corpse tendrils there. Sometimes you don't have to use corpse tendrils much. Electrified obelisks, pretty dangerous. Oh my god. Yeah, that was the volcanic again. Yeah, volcanic is pretty nasty. You don't always see it coming, but as you can see, like, it's such a high tier nightmare dungeon, that crap does a lot of damage. At any rate, doesn't matter too much. Ah, volcanic, get off of me. Be careful for the bloated monsters. There's a lot of monsters that explode like spider hosts and whatnot. Those things are nasty. Notice that movement speed is really nice in general. Notice how I can use Blood Mist there. I was frozen. I used the Blood Mist to get out. Look at how effective Bone Storm is there. At keeping me alive and killing the monsters simultaneously. I'm using Blight constantly to keep the monsters in one spot. Holy crap, this is insane. Gotta say, in a tier 49, this is something to watch right here. Look at those big numbers, man. Oh man. The monsters really don't do a good... Volcanics is just nasty stuff. Alright. Finally can use the healing well. It allows us to use it finally. It's not cursed anymore. Okay. That's a pretty good demo, actually, of what this character truly is capable of, by the way. Oh no, terrifying. I don't like that mod at all. Oh god. Ugh. Double freeze on this thing? Yeah, cold enchanted frozen. Ugh. Ugh. Yeah, I really wanted to showcase like a really tough dungeon. Not necessarily like tough for this character particularly, but just like a pretty high tier one, so you can see that this build really can destroy. No, not the volcanic, dude. Jesus, what hit me there? Fire enchant. Careful. Fire enchant explosion. Lots of death explosions in Diablo 4. This is really the upper limit of what we can do though, like tier 50 right now until we get a bit more levels and stats. Not high enough level otherwise. I might ask, why didn't we use the shrine? I didn't want to show that with the shrine. Shrines are pretty easy, right? Normally when you play though, of course you use the shrine, right? Remember, you can always use your evade as well. I don't know if we got the corpse. I guess that thing can't generate corpses like that. Still not 100% sure about some mechanics. There we go, Sunken Ruins complete. Tier 49. Yay! A lot of people wondered when I made my leveling guide on Maxwell, is it possible to play Blight Corpse Explosion Necromancer in the late game? As you can see, just fine. And of course, the other two glyphs we have are maxed out completely, so at this point I was getting the minimum level 15 one and leveling that one, because it probably has the least impact. Good defensive stats, though. Yeah, there you have it, guys. GG. You can definitely, don't have to necessarily always be brawling in the middle of the monsters. Yeah, that bloating guy is gonna do some damage to us there for sure. Not bad. I'll take 2 deaths to the volcanic in this one. That's not too bad. The one where the ghost finished me off was still volcanic, but volcanic, I'm pretty in general. This build sometimes struggles a bit with death explosions, so go figure. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the Blight CE Necromancer guide and demo, the late game guide and demo. Like to see more of those builds out there. Start crushing it, showing what this lady can do, or a guy if you made her Necro a guy. Doesn't matter. Anyway. GG, I will have timestamps below. Let me know what you guys think below. Let me know what you guys' favorite Necromancer is, as there's so many build options in this game, or even if there's a lot of build options, as I even explained, even within this build there are options, just because of how much customization is available from Paragon and passives and things like that. So yeah, and you know, obviously imprints and aspects. It's just pretty cool. I'm enjoying this game. I hope you guys are too. But if you're not, whatever. See you guys next time. Let's get it. Dark Humility. Over and out. Let's crush it.